Dust rose like smoke against the calm waters of the lake. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the quiet forest, carrying across the water like a warning. Birds scattered from the trees as heavy machinery tore into the small cabin, its beams cracking, its glass shattering, its foundation trembling under the weight of arrogance. Neighbors stood along the shore, some with hands pressed to their mouths, others whispering nervously to one another. They knew what the cabin meant. They knew it was more than wood and nails, but fear had kept them silent for too long. And at the center of it all stood Karen, the head of the HOA, arms folded, lips curled into a satisfied smirk. She watched as the cabin collapsed. She didn't flinch at the breaking glass, the falling timbers, or the cries of those who knew the history of that place. To her, this was victory. "He didn't pay his fees," she declared, her voice sharp, almost triumphant. "Rules are rules. If you can't afford to follow them, you don't belong here." Her followers nodded, though unease flickered in their eyes. The truth was whispered but never spoken. Marcus had paid every fee. His records were clean, but Karen's word had always been treated as law. The machines roared louder until the cabin was nothing more than rubble, its chimney crumbling last, like a tombstone for memories that could not be replaced. But just as Karen turned to leave, the rumble of tires broke the silence. Black SUVs rolled down the narrow road, dust curling behind them. The vehicles stopped, doors opened in unison, and men and women stepped out, calm, stern, their jackets shifting just enough to reveal the glint of badges. The lake grew silent again, but not from fear. This time it was anticipation. Something far greater than Karen's petty rule had arrived. The man who owned the cabin was Marcus. To most, he was a quiet figure, someone who fished at dawn and greeted neighbors with a nod. He never raised his voice, never argued in HOA meetings, never demanded recognition. He was content to let others talk while he simply lived. But Marcus carried stories that silence often hides. His cabin by the lake was not a luxury. It was not built to impress. It was a gift. His father had built it decades ago with his own hands, plank by plank, nail by nail. It had been the place where Marcus first learned to skip stones, where family barbecues filled the summer air with laughter, where his mother's voice once carried across the porch as she sang old hymns into the night. To Marcus, the cabin was not just a structure. It was a living memory of the people who had shaped him, a sanctuary of his family's history. So when Karen targeted it, calling it unpaid property, she wasn't just taking wood and stone. She was desecrating his past. Marcus was away when it happened, visiting family in another state. He had been sitting at his sister's kitchen table when the phone call came. A neighbor's trembling voice told him the cabin was being torn down, that Karen had brought in contractors, that it was nearly gone. Marcus said nothing for a long time. His face was still, his hands folded, his silence heavy. Then he looked to his sister and said quietly, "It's time." Because Marcus's family was not ordinary. They had spent their lives serving the law at its highest levels, Homeland Security, FBI, U.S. Marshals. And while Marcus preferred peace, his family understood justice. And justice was already on its way to the lake. Marcus's father had worn a uniform. He returned from service with scars, but also with dreams to build something lasting for his children. He had no riches, no empire, but he had hands that knew the weight of a hammer, the patience of measuring beams, the endurance to keep building even when exhaustion pressed heavy. The cabin rose slowly, board by board, until it became more than a home. It was a symbol of persistence. It was where Marcus's family gathered after funerals, where they celebrated graduations, where they weathered storms together, the sound of rain on the roof becoming a kind of music. When his father passed, Marcus inherited the cabin. He made repairs, sanded the floors, repainted the walls. He would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun sink into the water, feeling his father's presence in every creak of the wood. The HOA never cared for that story. They saw only a building to control. Karen had long resented Marcus. He didn't bend to her gossip, didn't fawn for her approval. To her, independence was defiance, and so she waited for a chance to break him. She claimed Marcus missed payments. She ignored receipts. She forged records. And when no one dared oppose her, she ordered the demolition. But she didn't understand who Marcus truly was. For Marcus came from a family built not just on wood and stone, but on service, loyalty, and the law. His silence was not weakness, it was patience. And patience has a way of outlasting arrogance. The SUVs remained parked as the dust from the demolition settled over the lake. Karen's smile faltered as she saw the people stepping out. These were not ordinary neighbors. Their presence shifted the air. One man displayed a badge from Homeland Security. A woman adjusted her jacket, revealing the seal of the FBI. Another carried himself with the unmistakable authority of a U.S. Marshal. Karen blinked, confused, her words stuttering. Who are you? This is HOA business. The man at the front spoke, his voice steady, calm, but commanding enough to make even the machines fall silent. It stopped being HOA business the moment you destroyed private property under false pretenses. The crowd murmured. Neighbors exchanged glances. For the first time, Karen looked small, her power crumbling as quickly as the cabin had. And then Marcus arrived. He stepped out of the final vehicle, his eyes fixed on the ruins of his family's cabin. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He simply walked forward, his family of agents forming a quiet wall behind him. He stopped at the edge of the rubble, his hand brushing against a piece of shattered wood. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Then he stood straight, facing Karen, who was now pale and trembling. You thought fear was power, Marcus said softly. But his voice carried across the lake. You mistook silence for weakness. You were wrong. The agent stepped forward, presenting documents, outlining charges, fraud, destruction of property, abuse of authority. Karen's protests turned into pleas, her arrogance collapsing into panic. The neighbors who once bowed their heads now raised them, emboldened by the truth revealed before them. Marcus turned once more to the rubble. His heart ached, but his resolve was unshaken. His father's legacy was not gone. It lived in him, in his family, in the law that stood now on his side. Wood can be broken, he said, but honor cannot. And with that, the balance of power shifted forever. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the rubble of the cabin glowed in the fading light. Neighbors gathered quietly, no longer afraid, knowing the reign of fear had ended. Karen was led away, her voice drowned out by the steady steps of justice. Marcus stood tall, his family at his side. The cabin could be rebuilt. What mattered was that dignity had endured, and truth had spoken louder than arrogance. Authority isn't a title, Marcus whispered to himself. It's integrity. And in that moment, everyone who heard knew they had witnessed the difference. What would you have done if you had been standing at the lake that day? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe integrity is stronger than arrogance, subscribe for more stories that honor true silent strength.